Good morning. Today's date is July 11th, 2008. My name is Tyrone Belanger. Today I will be conducting an oral history interview with Herbert Lebowitz for the Veterans History Project in partnership with the Dalton Council on Aging. This interview is being held at the Dalton Community Television Studio in Dalton, Massachusetts. Good morning, Herb.
Good morning, Tyrone.
Would you please state your full name and spell your last name?
Herbert Lebowitz. Lebowitz. There's no middle initial.
Thank you. Where do you presently live?
I live at 6 Cynthia Lane, Pittsfield, Massachusetts.
And would you give me your date of birth and where were you born?
The date of birth, August 9th, 1921. I was born on the east side of New York, Avenue D. I just don't remember the number, but I was born at home and not in a hospital.
Most of the people back then were born mainly at home, in the home?
Generally,
Yeah.
yes.
Did you grow up and go to school there?
No, step by step, we moved from the east side to Harlem, and then from Harlem to the Bronx. And growing up, my memories recall that I grew up in the Bronx.
What school did you go to?
James Monroe High School in the Bronx.
That was in the Bronx?
Yeah.
What was life like for you growing up during the Depression?
It was pretty rough, but we managed. And basically, it was not the best of times, but as I said before, we managed. We were a small family, my father, mother, my younger sister, and myself. And we did get along, although we lived in a 3-room apartment. But as I said before, we did manage.
Yeah. Did you yourself do anything during the Depression in your work?
Yeah, as I grew up, I started selling ice cream with a box on my shoulder. And I used to go to Pelham Bay in the Bronx, which was a big beach resort where there were a lot of picnics. And I did remember I would put my box in the center of a group and just dish out the ice cream. And within an hour and a half, I had sold out. Came back to the train station where I had a Pepsi Cola and a pretzel, and came back home, and 3/4 of the profits I gave to my mother to take care of whatever help she needed.
Yeah. Now, I think we talked about this before. You did all this on foot? You'd pick up the ice cream, carry it to wherever you...
All on foot, but used the subway train, which eventually became an elevated outdoor train, and Pelham Bay was the last stop, and consequently, it was mostly on my shoulder, yes.
What did your father do for a living?
He had a laundry route in Yorkville, which is the German section of New York, and he did very well. But there was a time where, I don't know whether it was the beginning of the mafia or they'd been organized, but they took over his route. And the way they did it was by threatening his life. Now, my father, with 2 young kids, was a little worried. The police offered him bodyguard, but he didn't want any of that, and he just gave it up.
Did he work after that? Did he have a job later?
He found a job, and It wasn't a very lucrative job, but with that we managed the best we could.
Yeah. At least he found something that he could do
Yes.
to keep you going. And you did say you had one sister.
Yes.
Was your father a veteran?
No, he wasn't.
Did you graduate from high school?
Yes, I did. 1938, in fact.
Now, you mentioned something about a diploma that you got, that you were...
Yes, I did get a college entry diploma, which if I had intended to go to college, would have allowed me at least to get into the City College of New York.
Was that free if you got in? Would that have been free?
It would have been free at that
Yeah,
time.
I couldn't remember if we had talked about that.
Yes.
What did you do after you finished high school and that you didn't go to college?
Well, naturally, I looked for a job. I found one in the Garment Center of New York, and that's where I did most of my work before December, I forgot what the date was.
7th?
December, but when the Japanese did a job on Pearl Harbor, was when I started looking for work that could help the country.
Did you find something that you wanted?
Yes, I did. A couple of my friends had gone down to Washington and found jobs in the a naval torpedo factory. I went down and found a job at the Naval Gun Factory in Washington, D.C.
What year was that? Do you remember?
1941, I guess.
Yeah. Now, how long did you work there? I meant to ask you.
I don't know whether it was a year or maybe less, but my job was an apprentice machinist, and we worked on breeches for big guns for the Navy.
That was for the war effort?
For the war effort.
Were you drafted or did you enlist?
Well, we all had to sign up for the draft, and I had signed up for the draft in the Bronx. My draft board was in the Bronx. I was working in Washington, D.C. So when it came time for them to interview me in the Bronx, I went up to the Bronx, and I said to myself, if they were going to interview me, I better go down to Grand Central Station and enlist. And the reason I went down to enlist was that my desire for the war effort was, or in the service, was to get into the Air Corps. And I knew by enlisting I would have a much better chance of getting my desire to get into the Air Corps.
Where did you enlist?
It was Grand Central enlisting station in that area, and that's where it was.
You did say that you went into the Army Air Corps, right? You got into the Army Air Corps?
I did. I did get into the Army Air Corps, and I was very lucky that I got what I had asked for.
You didn't want the infantry, huh?
I don't think anybody wanted the infantry, and but if that was the case, which you'll hear later, it would have been all right with me.
I do remember that you did say that you liked airplanes anyway. You wanted to fly.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that was good that you got into it. How old were you when you went to the service?
21.
Yeah. And do you remember your dates of service? You were good at that before.
Was I?
Did you remember?
Well, I know it had to be 42, and I think I was separated in 46.
Very good. And you did explain why you went into the Air Corps. Where were you sent for boot camp?
Well, we took the train down to the IRT down at Camp Upton in Long Island, where they presented us with our new clothes, the Army uniform. And from there, we boarded a train for Randolph Field, Texas, in San Antonio, Texas. And that's where I went for boot camp.
Do you remember? Do you remember any of your experiences in boot camp?
Well, the experience was I was a little envious of the people who were chosen to be pilots, because they were going up in these trainer planes, and I was just there on the ground doing marching and whatever you're doing, excuse me, in boot camp. Excuse me. Doing whatever you do in boot camp, marching back and forth and so forth.
You mentioned the mess hall when we were talking about this before. There was a mess hall incident or whatever.
The one thing about the Army, in my experience, is we always had good food. And when we used to line up for food at Randolph Field, the mess sergeant would always say, take what you want, but make sure that you eat everything.
Was it hard for you to adjust now to the military life?
I don't think so. I was really enjoying it. And the one thing I did enjoy was the fact that I was in the Air Corps, and I was getting my basic training at Randolph Field. I said, I think I'm in.
Yeah, you couldn't get much closer to the Air Corps than there. Now, how long was boot camp? Do you remember basic the training?
I don't remember what it generally was, whether it was 4 weeks or 5 weeks, but I would say that was about it.
Do you remember any of your instructors, any of their names?
All I know that they were good at marching. I don't remember any of their names. I don't remember any of my instruction, because, as I said before, my mind was on airplanes at that time.
Yeah, I know you did mention they were good instructors. Did you get a furlough right after boot camp, or?
No furlough.
And where were you after boot camp? Where were you sent to next?
We were sent to Laredo, Texas. It was the Laredo, Texas Air Force Gunnery School, where they had AT-6s, which were trainer planes. And at that point, we were put into the classroom with the original training for becoming a Air Force airplane mechanic.
Do you remember how long you were there?
Probably about 6 months. I do remember I was there in the wintertime. The weather was beautiful. I know it was cold back north.
Now, you said you were trained on the AT-6s, or you started learning on the AT. What were they called? You mentioned they called them something. There was some kind of a name for them, other than the. No.
I really don't remember. I might have remembered at the time, but.
Yeah, that's okay. I know you mentioned it before, and I just. Now, after Laredo, you moved on to another station, training station.
I can go back to Laredo and tell you the work that we did, because they put us in a classroom, and the next thing you know, we were out on the line working on the AT-6s. But we weren't doing any engine work. what we were doing was letting the water out of the gas tanks in the morning, where we tightened up the petcock, put the safety on, before they filled up the plane with fuel.
That was still at
Laredo, Texas.
And after Laredo, Texas, you moved on. Mississippi?
Gulfport, Mississippi, where we got the biggest amount of engine training and airplane mechanics.
Now, you basically learned just about everything with the engines? I mean, that was...
We learned engines and the airplane mechanics.
Wow. Do you remember how long you were there?
Maybe a year.
So you're doing an awful lot of training. I imagine you have to have an awful lot of training to do the job that you were going to do. Now, when you were in Mississippi, you did mention you got to see a celebrity, or a couple of celebrities.
Yeah, while we were there, Bob Hope came down with his troupe to do some entertaining. And Jerry Colonna, Francis Langford. There was an airplane hangar full of men around, and they did a beautiful job and made us very happy while they were there.
That was probably one of his earlier shows back then, because he did it for quite a few years.
Yes, and we were very glad that he was able to come to Gulfport, Mississippi to do that show.
And did you get any leave while you were there at the base?
Yeah, we got leave, but not leave to go home. They were like weekend passes, where 1 week we would go to New Orleans, and 2 weeks later we get another weekend leave and go to Mobile, Alabama.
So you got to see a little bit of the South while you were there?
Yes, and quite a bit of New Orleans.
Now, did you get to see the French Quarter?
Definitely, and the jazz and everything that was available there, yep.
Yeah, that must have been quite the thing way back then.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have, not that far back, but after Mississippi, now you're still doing training. Do you remember where you went?
I think from Gulfport, Mississippi, we went to Burbank, California, to the Lockheed factory, where they were assembling planes, and we needed some of that info to help us with the job we were going to do later.
So you saw it right from the ground up, basically, when they're putting the plane together?
That's basically the way they were leading us.
Wow. Now you're moving on again. You're still in training. Salt Lake City?
Salt Lake City, the first time we saw guns. We were in the Army, we were in the Air Force, and we had to have small arms training. And we were sent to Salt Lake City for that. We were in Salt Lake City, I would say, for about 3 to 4 weeks.
Just training on the small weapons, basically.
Small arms, yeah.
And then you're on to Kansas City?
Kansas City, which was an old factory which they had set up as training quarters and living quarters, and we were there for more advanced training.
Now the training, you mentioned the air transport training?
Air Transport Command, because what they were leading us to were planes like the C-46 and C-47 that were going to be transporting troops and personnel to various locations.
So these basically weren't bombers, though, or fighter planes. They were cargo?
Cargo planes. And it was the Air Transport Command, or what they called Hap Arnold's taxi company.
Yeah, but that was important, I imagine, all the supplies, everything that they needed.
Well, we'll see what happened later on, of course.
Yeah. And that was your unit, per se, throughout the service, was the Army Air Force
Transport Command.
Transport Command. It's quite a mouthful. After Kansas City, you went to Reno, Nevada.
At that point, we knew where they were leading us. It was training to become an air flight engineer, an aerial engineer. On the C-46s, there's a four-man crew: pilot, co-pilot, radio operator, and flight engineer. I went to Reno to continue my training as a flight engineer.
What was your job as a flight engineer? Did you know exactly what you had to do by then?
Definitely. We had to stand behind the pilot and co-pilot, make sure that when one tank got empty to transfer to another, make sure that all the things were working properly, and if there were any problems starting to come up, to notify the pilot immediately so we can get down to the ground real quick.
Well, you didn't want to go too quick.
Well,
Get it down enough.
we didn't want to get down too quick, but in one incident, we were at 30,000 feet when the right engine started spouting oil. And I said, "Captain, I think we have an oil leak." He said, "Okay," and we started down. It took us a good half hour to reach the ground because he had to circle the airport, come down very slowly, but we did get down safely.
That's good. I mean, you had quite a responsibility.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Everybody on the crew had a responsibility.
But it seemed like yours was, I mean, the pilot had to be good, but you had to make sure that that whole plane was working.
Right, and if there were any faults or anything, to notify the mechanics on the line to make sure they were taken care of.
And now from Reno, was it Memphis, Tennessee next? Or no, St. Joe?
St. Joe, Missouri.
That was it.
I got notified that the people who were watching me, I guess, wanted me to be an instructor, and they were setting up a school in St. Joe, Missouri. And in the Army, you don't say no. So next thing I know, I was on not a plane, but a train to St. Joe, Missouri. I knew at that time I didn't want to be an instructor. And I let everybody know I didn't want to be an instructor. However, I had a few weeks in St. Joe, and I made a lot of friends when I was in Kansas City. So we had a couple of passes to Kansas City. When I came back, they told me, due to the fact that I didn't want to be an instructor, they were sending me back to Reno to continue my aerial engineer training.
So you're still training.
Still training.
Then after Reno, you went to Memphis, Tennessee?
Well, at the point after having 45 flight hours with different pilots, and we were put on a list because we were ready for duty. And I was transferred to Memphis, Tennessee, where I was going to pick up the rest of my crew, because our assignment was to bring a C-46 over to North Africa.
Now, did you get any military leave, any leave before you went overseas?
When I was transferred to Memphis, I did get the first home leave in all the time that I was in the service up to that point.
So you've been away almost, a year and a half?
I would say almost 2 years.
Almost 2 years.
Yeah.
Wow. How did you feel coming home, wearing a uniform, knowing that you...
It was a nice feeling, and all the relatives came to see me, and I felt very comfortable being home. It was nice. But I think I had the feeling that I really wanted to get back to Memphis and get started on my next
Assignment?
assignment.
No, that's a trip and a half, if I can recall. When you were all set, all ready to go, you made 4 or 5 stops, or?
Yeah, we started out from Memphis, Tennessee. We took the plane to Miami. In Miami, they just filled up the tanks, topped the tanks with gas, fuel, and we had leave. We had a one-day pass to go into Miami, which was very nice. Came back. Our next stop was Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, we then flew to Trinidad. In Trinidad, I met one of my friends who I had grown up with, who was in a submarine service. We spent the day together, and at that point, we left Trinidad. Next hop was Belém, Brazil. Belém, Brazil, we then flew to Ascension Island, which was a little hairy because the airfield was set between 2 mountains. But we had a very good pilot, set us down very good, and we hit Ascension Island okay. Our next stop was West Africa, where I can remember for the first time seeing natives working on rubber trees because we were right near a Firestone rubber plantation. From there, we flew up to Casablanca.
Now, well, I just want to stop you for a second. Was there any, these were basically just refueling stops along the way, getting to your main objective?
They were refueling stops, and naturally, if there were any faults found on a plane, they would be taken care of. But basically, luckily, we didn't have any faults on the whole trip.
I don't know if I asked you this before. About how long did that whole trip take?
You would have to ask me that.
And I don't know if we talked about it before.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to tell, but if you take a day at a time and going from Memphis to Miami, Miami to Puerto Rico, Puerto Rico to Trinidad, say about 7 days.
Yeah, okay. Now you're in Casablanca. You got to Casablanca. Was that your objective, the main objective?
The objective was to bring the plane to Casablanca. It had a full cargo, and for some reason or other, I didn't find out what the cargo was until they told me, and I had a laugh. Because the plane was full of cases of Camel cigarettes who they were bringing over for the GIs who were assembling to go into southern France.
So they, for every infantryman, they said there was quite a few in support. And this was your support in helping them get their cigarettes.
At that point?
Yeah, at that point. I mean, just that particular flight. I mean, they had to get the plane over there anyway, right? So they must have,
right.
said, let's. Now, you're in Casablanca. You're going to start your overseas duties, basically.
We're living in tents, and in the evening, there were a lot of Italian war prisoners there would come in for some entertainment, and they were all good singers. So it was really great to mix with them, and knowing that they were prisoners and not fighting us anymore. And while I was in Casablanca, I did have some city leave to see what was going on in the city. And I can remember cars being driven with fireplaces on the back, burning wood to give them locomotion.
Really? Now, is that because they didn't have fuel, or is that just...
Obviously.
Now, did you get to see any... well, you did mention the entertainment. You got to have some kind of
Yeah.
entertainment
They
besides
were, they were excellent singers.
But you mentioned Frank Sinatra?
Well, Frank Sinatra and Sheridan were coming over to do some entertaining, and I did see them and knew that they were there.
Yeah. Were they as good as the Italian singers? Just
They didn't entertain
Oh, they
for
didn't
me, so I didn't. I
I
just
see.
happened to see them.
Okay. Now, you're in Casablanca, I think you said about a week or so? 6 weeks? Whatever.
Yep.
Now you're moving on again.
Yeah, at that point they informed me that they're taking flight engineers off the plane. And I get my walking papers, or flying papers now. We're flying to Benghazi, Libya, which was my next assignment.
But now you're not a flight engineer anymore.
No, I'm
per
on
se.
the line
You're on a line now.
and doing various different jobs. When the planes come in that are flying the route from China, Karachi, over the Persian Gulf into Cairo, and they stop at Benghazi for fueling or to have some repairs made that are discovered in flight. And I had two jobs, which it eventually turned out to be. One was to work on a line and take care of faults, but also I was then given the job of driving these big fuel tankers to the fuel dump, filling them up, bringing them down to the line, and filling the gas tanks for the airplanes.
So you were pretty busy, or they'd come and you'd be busy for a while, and then you'd get some free
Yeah,
time?
the planes would come in, we'd be busy. They go out, we have plenty of time off. I was able to walk to the beach, and at that time I inherited a police store called Snafu, and we used to go to the beach together, and I'd look up and down the beach for miles, and we'd be the only ones on the beach. Since I loved to swim, I went swimming, and Snafu liked to swim. He went swimming. But we did notice that all along were the remnants of the North African campaign. Broken tanks, fenders of cars, and what have you, that's left after there have been big battles.
Yeah. Now you're off to Cairo. Is it Cairo?
After being in Benghazi, I get transferred to Cairo, Egypt. Big airplane base, Paint Field, and there I'm on the line working, doing inspections of airplanes as they come in, and basically, let me reiterate, they're all C-46s, the planes that I would basically training on back in the States.
So you knew the planes very, very well. Now you had to, when they came in, if they had something wrong with them, they'd tell you?
We'd have to go over them, fix them, make sure that they were okay.
And then you'd give the okay for these planes?
We'd have to sign off on whatever has to do. In a lot of cases, the first place we would look at is the simplest place, which I think all mechanics learn, is the fuel pump.
That's the name.
That's the first place we'd look.
What goes wrong?
But there were a lot of other
time.
things, yes.
Now you were there for about 5 months doing this. I think
Yeah.
it was 5 months. You said. Now you're off to
Bahrain Island in the Persian Gulf. Also doing the same duty was an emergency stop along that route. I believe at that time, or I was told, that it was one of the hottest places on Earth. And we were sent there just for 4 months duty. If we wanted to re-up for another 4 months, we had the privilege of doing that.
Yeah.
But I was there for 4 months.
Did you find it hot?
It was hot. We lived in barracks, and the barracks had about a foot above the barracks leaves. And we were able to open both ends of the barracks to create what I call today desert air conditioning.
Desert air conditioning. Did it work to a
It
certain
worked,
point?
yeah.
Now you mentioned that you met a fellow by the name of Gordon Murray.
Gordon Murray was an excellent guitar player. He never took a lesson, and I loved the way he played, and I said, Gordon, if you had time, could you teach me to play the guitar? And he said, sure, Herb, you get a guitar and I'll teach you. I said, hey, I'm on Bahrain Island. How am I going to get a guitar? So that was that for a while. But anyway, I got a 2-week course in Basra, Iran, which is now Iraq, but at that time it was Iran. And I flew up to Basra, and while I was there, I saw the special service officer. And I said, Lieutenant, we're down in Bahrain Island and we don't have anything. I said, gee, can't you do something? He said, well, Herbie says, we have these cases of instruments, 2 guitars, harmonicas, a couple of harps, and flutes and what have you. He says, hey, I'll be glad to send the case down for you. So when I got back to Bahrain, the first thing I did is I ran into the office and I said, there's a case coming down. I want one of the guitars. And I got it. I got the guitar. Gordon started to teach me how to play, but we weren't there long enough for me to really pick up what he could do.
So you got some lessons, but you didn't get a chance to actually learn how to play the guitar.
Right.
Now, before we get going, was he surprised that you found a guitar? I meant to ask you that.
Yeah. He said, they were able to get the guitar. He couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
But the key here is that at the point I got transferred back to Cairo, I still wanted to continue with the guitar lessons, but when I got the books, they started to be too complicated for me, so I gave it up. But I held on to the guitar.
And you still have that guitar today?
Yeah.
And still don't know how to play it?
I still have that guitar today. It's sitting in my bedroom.
Do you have the book for the...
I have some books, yes.
All right, now you're in Cairo, and the job got interesting, you mentioned. Is it?
Yes. In Cairo, if planes needed bigger inspections, we had to bring them out to what I call the desert, which is about 1.5 miles from the main depot where people were loading and where they loaded the planes with the necessary materials.
Yeah.
And some guys had this job, but they weren't doing a very good job because the C-46 is a 2-engine plane. And when you taxi it, you push the levers forward to get speed. When you want to stop, you bring them back. But these guys were using their brakes. And when the officers saw that, they got a little concerned because you can't afford during the war to wear out brakes. And the one time that I was taxiing a plane, they saw that I was taxiing it using the levers on the plane for steering. So they gave me that job. And that job was I'd be taken out to the planes, which were a mile and a half out in the desert, and pre-flight them, because they were there after they had been worked on by the mechanics. And my job was to check that everything was okay. So I bring the planes in about a half a mile to do the pre-flight. When everything checked out okay, my next job was to bring them up to the depot where they were going to be loaded, and then check the gas tanks to make sure that they were filled. And it was quite a job, and it was quite interesting because some of the areas I remember where we were bringing Maryland Marauders back from China, and where we supported the Tehran Conference when Roosevelt, Chiang Kai-shek, Stalin, and Churchill were meeting up in Tehran. So that was very interesting.
That's good. Yeah, that's quite a little story, nice little story. I like that. Now, you're leaving Cairo, and you said you went to Rome? Was it Rome later?
Well, the war was over in Europe, and they didn't know what to do with us, I guess. So next thing I know, I'm on a plane to Rome, Ciampino Airport. And we didn't have a heck of a lot of work to do. In fact, some of the work that I did was just when the planes came in landing, was to bring them in like they do today so they can get to their spot where they would unload.
So they just basically found a job for you.
Yeah.
For now.
Yeah.
Now, after Rome, I'm trying to bear with me. Oh, no, now when you're in Rome, something happened in Rome. That was it. You went out to party? Was it
Wait, before that.
Was it before that?
Before that. We used to go into town, and this was after the war in Europe, and we used to, I'd given up cigarettes. I forgot to tell you that story.
Yeah, that's right. I remember. Yeah, that's right. We missed that part.
I'd given up cigarettes when I had R&R in Palestine, which is now Israel, and I would take my ration of cigarettes into town, and we'd sell it. And we'd have enough money to go to Alfredo's for dinner, and after dinner, we'd go to the opera. And in Rome, they changed operas about twice a week. So within 2 weeks, while I was in Rome, I saw 3 different operas and got to like it. And then after opera, there was a place called the Florida Club where there was nightclub entertainment. And that was great duty. And I have a feeling that if I had stayed in Rome a longer period of time, I could have easily picked up the Italian language.
And you mentioned that you ended up in a hospital. Was this still?
Oh yeah, New Year's Day.
That was it, that's right.
New Year's Day, Rome. We slept in tents, but the officers had all the whiskey. And they decided to have a New Year's Eve party in the hangar. And everybody was invited, and we were in the hangar having a great time. And you have to use the restroom sometime, and there wasn't one in the hangar. So we had to go outside. Or if there was one in the hangar, we didn't know where it was, so we decided to walk outside. I walked out with two buddies, and it was a sort of a little hilly path out of the hangar with a ditch on each side. And having a little bit of too much liquor, we were a little wobbly. Next thing I knew, I fell into the ditch. The two guys fell on top of me, and I had a concussion on my left arm. The next thing I knew, I was in an Army hospital in the city of Rome. The first time I'd been in a hospital in my service in the
Your
Army.
career? Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned you wrote home to your mother, or you called your mother?
I wrote home to my mother. I said, Mom, I want you to know I got plastered and I hurt my arm. And when I got home, my mother told me this story. She said, she asked the neighbor, what does plastered mean? No, what does cemented mean?
That's what I thought. She had a little mixed up there, but it was cute, you know.
Yeah.
All right, now you're in the hospital.
Oh, wait, I want to go back.
Go ahead.
One of the movies they showed right after I got into the hospital was Ray Milland and the Lost Weekend.
Oh, yeah, you didn't mention that before.
Yeah.
All right, so now you're in the hospital. You've been there for
I'm in the
about
hospital
5 weeks,
for-
3 to 5 weeks.
For about 5 weeks. And my organization, my group, is leaving Rome and flying to Vienna. And I'm in the hospital. I was so mad. I'm in the hospital, they're flying to Vienna.
And they wouldn't let you out of the hospital?
They wouldn't let me out until I got released. The next thing I know, they were keeping their communication with me. They were in Paris. I'm still in the hospital. The next thing I know, they're flying in a C-54 back to the States to be discharged from the service. I'm still in the hospital. Then I'm notified that I'm ready for my release, but I'm going in a truck from Rome through the mountains to Naples. I'm coming home in a Liberty ship, which takes about 6 days. When they released me from the hospital, the doctor said it'd be good for Herb to carry his duffel bag. It'd be good for his arm. So it was one of the reasons they released me. But I also had my guitar.
You kept it with you.
We were in Naples, and one day I look at the chart, and I got guard duty. And I'm guarding 2 German prisoners. Thankfully, the guard duty went well. I didn't have any problems, but it was the first time that I really felt that I was carrying a pistol and doing some kind of real military work.
That was the first time that you felt that.
Yeah.
Then, yeah. So you were there for, well, you were there for a week or so.
About a week, about a week. And next thing you know, we were loading on to the Liberty ship. And whatever goes on with the Liberty ship, food, eating, crap games, card games, what have you. And then we come into New York with a royal welcome. And the next thing, I'm at Fort Dix for my discharge.
Now, I have not asked anyone this. Now, you said you got a royal welcome or whatever else. Now, is this when they had did they have the boats, the fire boats that were spraying water? Did that ever happen when you were coming through? You know, I know we saw pictures of those.
I don't remember the fireboat. What I do remember vividly is that when the boat came into New York, I could look up the East River and see the bridges. And then I felt that I was really home.
Before we go on any further, Herb, I'd like to go back a little bit to your R&R overseas. You mentioned your R&R in a motorcycle, and we forgot to talk about that.
Well, basically, when I was in Benghazi, I inherited a BMW motorcycle. It didn't have a clutch pedal, but if you kicked it on the side, it would go. And I did ride it, and I enjoyed it. I was able to go into town with it. And when I got the job on that fuel truck, we were right in the fuel depot. I could always fill it up with gas and go wherever I wanted to. But unfortunately, when I got transferred to Cairo, I wasn't able to bring the motorcycle, and I wasn't able to bring Snafu, my police dog puppy. But that's the way I got him, and that's the way I had to leave him.
Yeah. Now, did you mention something about R&R?
When I was in Cairo, I had leave, and we had a couple of weeks in Palestine, which is now Israel. And the experiences there were very interesting for me, because when I was there, we came into Tel Aviv, and we spent time there, and then we got on a bus because we wanted to see the rest of the area of Palestine, what was there, and the people were very nice. We get on a bus line at the very end, they come and grab us and push us right to the front of the line. We took the bus, and I spent about a week at a kibbutz. I can remember the name of it, and I don't know if it's still around, Kibbutz Mayan. And I saw how the people were working on a collective farm and what they were trying to do. Now, you still have to remember, this is Palestine at
Right.
that point, under English control. And we had a lot of fun because while we were there, we worked with the people. It was very interesting. We went to the dances and the entertainment at night. We took our showers where the men were in one room and the women were in another room. And we also at that time saw the Arabs who were working on their farms with their old-fashioned ways. From that point, I remember we went up to Haifa, and I spent some time in Haifa. But getting back when I first went on a trip, when I went into the service, I was a heavy smoker. I smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day. And it was very easy to smoke when you were in the service because you were getting your cigarettes very inexpensively. And working on airplanes, I was able to fill my Zippo lighter every day. And so I can remember getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning, sitting over the side of my bed, lighting a cigarette. So there were times about, I would say 3 or 4 different times where I tried to give them up unsuccessfully. And now we're starting our trip to Palestine. I'm with a buddy, and we're sitting in this plane. And I have my fresh carton ration of cigarettes, a carton of cigarettes. I take out a pack. I take out a cigarette, I light it, and I start to cough. I said to my buddy, with the carton of cigarettes in the pack, I said, here, take this. I'm not going to smoke anymore. And that's when I stopped smoking.
It's amazing.
I still remember.
That's amazing. All right, now we got the memories back. You were discharged from Fort Dix. How did you feel? Do you have any memories of that particular day that when you got the discharge?
Well, I think the thing was that we were out of the service. Now, being overseas for the amount of time I was, you do get pretty much homesick. So I was feeling pretty good about that, and I felt pretty good about coming home because I felt that even though there were times where I felt at ease overseas, there were times when you did get a little bit lonely and feel that you want to be back home. So on my discharge, I think I felt very good.
Was there anybody else that was discharged with you at that time?
Yeah, we're getting off the boat, and who comes walking by? This little fella. Turn around, Mickey Rooney. So he would be in, I don't know where he served, but he was discharged about the same time that I was.
So that had to be exciting. I mean, he was already a celebrity at the time.
Oh, yeah. He was a celebrity since he was 3 years old.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Was it hard now to adjust back to civilian life that you've been in the military now for about 4 years?
Well, we had this club called the 5220 Club. We figured we could take it easy. We had this big swimming pool out in the Bronx called Castle Hill Swimming Pool. We joined that, and that's where we spent most of the summer. And pretty much after the 5220 checks, now everybody knows what the 5220 check is. Every week you went up to this unemployment office and got your $20 check, which at that time could go a little way.
Yeah, yeah.
But when that started running out, we started looking to what we're going to do. Basically, I always felt that I wanted to get into the jewelry business, become a gemologist, and that's where I headed.
So that's what you started out as a career. But going back a little bit, did you take advantage of the GI Bill?
Well, getting training as a gemologist was part of the GI Bill.
So they paid part of your training or salary, was it?
Part of salary.
But through the
which
GI Bill.
is part of the training.
Yeah.
Basically, when I look back on it, I'm saying to myself, if somebody said, Herb, why don't you go to college? I still had my college diploma. I could have gone anywhere I wanted. I think I would have gone. But I never gave it a thought.
Yeah.
Until today.
Now, you started out as a gemologist. And where did you go from there as a career?
Well, I worked for a chain jewelry store, and I was being transferred from Gloversville to North Adams, Massachusetts. So I had about 2 weeks off, went back to New York where my parents still living, and decided I may want to get a job in New York. So I went down to Harry Winston to see if I can get a job with him. At that time, they weren't employing anybody, so I said, I guess I'll have to take my transfer to North Adams. And at that time, I was driving a 39 Plymouth. Drove up to North Adams in my 39 Plymouth, looked around, saw the beautiful mountains. It was a nice sunny day. And I said to myself, with all my traveling, I think this is a place where I'd like to stay. And that was the beginning of my eventually being in Pittsfield.
What did you, were you still working for the same company, the gemologist?
Working for the same company, and within a short period of time, I met my wife. I came to North Adams in '49. I always remember the year, and it was in the spring. I met my wife, who was born and raised in Pittsfield, and somebody said to me at that time, "Gee, you came in '49. You're a '49er. Did you find gold?" I said, "Yes, I found my wife."
Very nice. And then, now, you mentioned that you did a couple of things, you actually changed careers a couple of times, right? Or at least once, maybe twice.
Right, quite a bit, yeah.
And what was your final?
I became a financial planner in 1969 and worked as a financial planner. I retired in, I'm trying to think, I hate to tell you how old I was, but I don't mind telling you my age. I retired when I was about 80 years old.
Wow.
I think I would have still been working because I really enjoyed doing it, built up a nice practice, but my wife and my kids thought it was about time I retired. And after they talked to me a while, I thought it was about time I retired too, so.
Yeah, now you did get married, you met your wife. And did you have any children?
I have the oldest son, who is now a professional. He's a piano player and humorist, and he spends most of his work out in San Francisco. I have a daughter who was built up a school in Boston from 2 students up to over 120, a big organization. And I have a young son who came into the financial planning, and when I retired, although he had a big practice, took over a big part of my practice.
So they were pretty successful themselves. Yeah. Did you keep in touch with any of your buddies?
The only time I can remember is when I first got out of service. This young fellow was a buddy of mine, and I was young at the time, but he was a little young, and he came driving up to my house in a motorcycle. He'd lived in Long Island, and he just had a feeling he wanted to get in touch with somebody that he was in the service with, and we spent a lot of good hours together. And that's about the only time I can remember, other than meeting one guy on Times Square when I was down there, and he was married, and saying hello to him.
Did you join any veterans organizations after the service?
No, I didn't. I became a Mason when I was in Pittsfield. I was raised at Mystic Lodge here. But I opened up a store in North Adams. So we decided to move up there. And my 3 children were born in Pittsfield, but went to school in North Adams and graduated from Drury High. I sort of lost my thought of where I...
We were talking about the Masons. We were talking
about
the Masons.
So a friend of mine said, "Gee, you're a Mason down in Pittsfield. Why don't you come to meetings here at the lodge here, Lafayette Lodge?" So eventually I went through the chairs and became a Master Mason in 1968. Being that I had gone through the chairs and was a master mason for all that time, I didn't feel I wanted to belong to any other organization.
Well, I imagine you were spending an awful lot of time giving them as
Yeah,
much time
learning
as that you did have.
learning the lessons and all that
Yeah.
stuff. Yes.
Do you feel that your service had a positive or negative effect on your life?
Well, I think it was positive. Of course, once looking back, I enjoyed what I did, and I realized that in some instances where I might have been able to stay in the States when they asked me to be an instructor, I have a feeling, I don't know what might have happened after that. And I feel, yeah, that it was a positive experience for me. And unfortunately, it had to be through that type of situation.
Yeah. I know we have a picture of probably the only memorabilia that you have in the up from the service. These are your dog tags?
Those are my dog tags.
And that's basically the only memorabilia that you have?
Another couple of pictures that I showed you. I'm still
Right.
looking for more pictures, but I did have a formal picture in uniform. Unfortunately, about 6 months ago, it was lost.
Well, thank you. Herb, I want to thank you very much for spending this time with us and then giving your experience of the war.
Well, I did the best I could, but if
Thank
you
you.
want to spend another hour,
You did a
we could
wonderful job.
talk some more.
You did a wonderful job. Thank you.